January 27, 1945. The courtyard at Ravensbrück concentration camp was silent, except for the crunch of frozen gravel underfoot. 3 women stood against a concrete wall, their breath visible in the pre-dawn air. One of them was Violette Szabo, 23 years old, a British intelligence officer who had been captured in Nazi-occupied France 7 months earlier. She had parachuted back into enemy territory, knowing agents who failed there were sent to camps designed to erase people entirely. That morning, as the guards raised their rifles, she refused the blindfold. In the final seconds of her life, the Gestapo files on her case remained stamped uncooperative, a bureaucratic understatement for a woman whose silence had protected 47 resistance fighters, collapsed Zero networks despite brutal interrogation, and forced the Third Reich to rewrite its assumptions about who was dangerous. This is the story of a woman the Nazis believed would break in days. She lasted 7 months and never spoke. Violette Szabo was born Violette Buchel in Paris in 1921, to an English father and a French mother. Her childhood was split between 2 countries, 2 languages, 2 identities she learned to shift between without thinking. By 1940, when Europe collapsed into war, she was working as a shopgirl in London, watching young men march off to fight while she folded dresses and smiled at customers. She was 19, restless and furious at her own uselessness. When she met Etienne Szabo, a dashing French legionnaire, it felt like meeting someone who carried the same unspoken rage. They married quickly. He shipped out to North Africa. She gave birth to their daughter Tania in June 1942. 8 weeks later, a telegram arrived informing her that Etienne had been killed in action at El Alamein. Violette read the message twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. She did not cry in front of anyone. She simply understood that grief without action would destroy her. The British Special Operations Executive, SOE, was recruiting women for covert operations in occupied France. The work involved sabotage, intelligence gathering, and coordinating resistance networks behind enemy lines. Most people assumed women would serve only as couriers or radio operators, performing support roles while men carried out the dangerous missions. In April 1944, she parachuted into France on her first mission, tasked with assessing the strength of resistance networks in Rouen. She completed the assignment in 12 days, evading checkpoints and Gestapo patrols, and returned to England with intelligence that proved essential to D-Day planning. She requested immediate reassignment to another mission. This time, the stakes were catastrophically higher. In June 1944, as Allied forces fought to expand their beachhead in Normandy, the SOE desperately needed agents to coordinate resistance sabotage across central France, blowing railway bridges, cutting communications lines, ambushing German convoys, attempting to reinforce the front. Violette was assigned to work with Jacques Dufour, a resistance leader operating in the Limoges region. She knew the area was saturated with German troops and milice collaborators conducting mass arrests. She knew that survival rates for agents dropped sharply after D-Day, when the Nazis intensified their hunt for Allied operatives. She also knew that her daughter Tania had just turned 2 years old. Before she left England, Violette visited the child at her parents' home one final time. She held her for nearly an hour, memorizing the weight of her small body, the particular smell of her hair. She tucked a tiny photograph of Tania into the inner lining of her field jacket, folding it so small it could be hidden in a single seam. Then she kissed her daughter goodbye, walked out the door, and boarded a plane bound for occupied France. She parachuted in on June 7, 1944, 24 hours after D-Day. Her orders were clear: link up with Dufour, coordinate sabotage operations across 3 départements, and transmit intelligence on German troop movements back to London. She wore peasant dresses and carried false papers identifying her as a widow traveling to visit family. She smiled politely at Wehrmacht soldiers manning checkpoints. She had mastered the art of making herself invisible by appearing completely ordinary, small, soft-spoken, harmless. The Germans looked right through her. They had no idea she was carrying enough intelligence to dismantle their defensive preparations across an entire region. What happened next would prove how catastrophic that assumption was. On June 10, Violette and Dufour were driving near the village of Salon-la-Tour when they encountered a Wehrmacht roadblock, conducting random vehicle searches. Violette's instincts screamed at her to abandon the car immediately and disappear into the fields. Dufour hesitated, uncertain whether running would draw more suspicion than cooperating. That single moment of hesitation triggered a sequence of events that would end in a concentration camp 700 miles away. A German officer ordered them out of the vehicle and began questioning Dufour about their destination. Violette's hand moved slowly toward the Sten gun hidden beneath the passenger seat. The officer's eyes flicked toward the movement. He opened his mouth to shout. She was already firing. True soldiers dropped before the others realized what was happening. Dufour bolted toward the tree line. Violette provided covering fire, backing toward a wheat field as bullets shredded the air around her. She had 32 rounds remaining. The Germans had an entire mechanized infantry company less than 2 kilometers away. For the next 90 minutes, she held off search teams. But Violette understood the mathematics of the situation with perfect clarity. Every minute she kept the Germans focused on her was another minute for Dufour to reach the emergency safe house, for the network to receive warning, for 47 names in her memory to stay protected. When her ammunition finally ran out, she continued moving, attempting to reach the forest boundary. A patrol cut her off near a collapsed barn. She fought them hand-to-hand until they beat her unconscious with rifle butts. She woke in a Gestapo interrogation cell in Limoges with 3 broken ribs and a concussion that made the walls tilt. They wanted the intelligence she had spent 3 weeks gathering, not her mission parameters, not a single resistance contact. They beat her systematically, working in shifts, using techniques designed to break prisoners without killing them. They threatened her family. They told her in graphic detail what they would do to her daughter if she continued to refuse cooperation. She stared at them without speaking, her silence so absolute it began to unnerve even experienced interrogators. After 12 days, the officer in charge wrote in his report, "Subject is a British SOE agent, small stature, appears harmless." This initial assessment was a severe operational error. Subject demonstrates abnormal resistance to interrogation. Physical coercion ineffective. Psychological pressure ineffective. Recommend immediate transfer to Germany for specialized processing. She had memorized techniques for managing pain, for compartmentalizing information, for surviving interrogation long enough for networks to relocate, and intelligence to expire. She knew that if she could hold out for 2 weeks, the operational details she carried would become outdated, the safe houses abandoned, the radio codes changed. Every day she remained silent was another day the network survived. Every session she endured without breaking saved lives she would never know about. In August 1944, the Gestapo gave up and shipped her east to Ravensbrück. The camp sat in a forest clearing in northern Germany, a grid of wooden barracks surrounded by electric fences, watchtowers, and the constant smell of crematorium smoke. Ravensbrück was designed specifically for women, political prisoners, resistance fighters, Jews, Roma, anyone the Reich wanted to erase from existence. The average survival time was 4 to 6 months. Most died of starvation, disease, beatings, or systematic execution. The guards had seen thousands of women enter the camp. They had watched all of them break eventually, reduced to shuffling shadows who stopped looking up when orders were shouted. They assumed Violette Szabo would follow the same trajectory. She was prisoner number 63, 930, a small woman with a shaved head and a striped uniform, no different from hundreds of others. They were about to learn otherwise. Inside Ravensbrück, Violette was assigned to a work detail hauling stones in the quarry. The guards shot them where they fell. But Violette had spent 2 years training her body for extreme physical stress. She made quiet alliances with other prisoners, sharing microscopic portions of food, covering for women too weak to meet their quotas. She also continued small, deliberate acts of sabotage. But the most dangerous thing she did was simply refusing to disappear. Other prisoners later testified that Violette never spoke about her past. She never mentioned her daughter, her husband, or her work with British intelligence. She kept the photograph of Tanya hidden in the hem of her uniform, folded so small it could fit between 2 stitches of fabric. On nights when the cold and hunger became unbearable, when the woman in the bunk next to her stopped breathing and wasn't discovered until morning, Violette would touch the place where the photograph was hidden and force herself to remember a face she could no longer see clearly in her mind. She told herself the same thing every night: if she gave up, if she let this place erase her, then everything she had protected meant nothing. Her silence in the Gestapo cells would be worthless. The 47 people whose names she had refused to speak would have been saved for no reason. By January 1945, the war was collapsing inward on Germany. Soviet forces were less than 100 kilometers from Berlin. Allied bombers were reducing German cities to rubble. Inside Ravensbrück, the camp administrators understood they were running out of time. Prisoners who had survived interrogation, who knew too much, who could testify about what had happened here, those prisoners became liabilities. The executions accelerated. On January 26, Violette and 2 other women were pulled from their barracks without explanation and told they were being transferred to another facility. They were marched to a small courtyard near the crematorium. No trucks were waiting. Violette did not resist. She stood with the others against the concrete wall, her hands steady at her sides, her breathing slow and controlled. When the guards offered blindfolds, she refused. She wanted to see their faces. She wanted them to remember hers. The execution was carried out at dawn on January 27th. 3 rifle shots. 3 bodies. 3 women, whose names the Nazis had tried to erase. For 2 years after the war ended, no one in Britain knew what had happened to Violette Szabo. Her family was told she had died in Germany, but received no additional details. The SOE files on her missions were classified. Her daughter Tanya was told her mother had been brave and that she wasn't coming home. It wasn't until 1947, when Ravensbrück survivors began testifying at war crimes trials, that the full story emerged. Witnesses described a young British woman, small, dark-haired, prisoner number 63930, who had been tortured by the Gestapo for 2 weeks and sent to the camp, who had continued acts of resistance even when resistance seemed suicidal, who had refused to become invisible even as the guards tried to erase her. They confirmed her identity through Gestapo arrest records and camp documentation. In 1946, Violette Szabo was posthumously awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian decoration for gallantry. In 1947, France awarded her the Croix de Guerre. Her daughter Tanya received both medals on her mother's behalf. She was 5 years old and didn't understand why everyone kept telling her how proud she should be. But even after the medals and the official recognition, Violette's story remained frustratingly incomplete. Camp records had been destroyed. Interrogation transcripts were burned. Many of the women who had known her at Ravensbrück were also dead. Violette Szabo had been systematically underestimated at every stage by camp guards who thought she would dissolve into the mass of prisoners like everyone else. Each time, that underestimation proved catastrophic for the people who made it. She was a 23-year-old widow who made an impossible choice, leaving her daughter behind to parachute into a war zone where captured agents were routinely tortured and executed, crawling intelligence that directly contributed to Allied success in Normandy. She was a prisoner who transformed captivity into continued resistance, protecting networks and saving lives even after her capture. And she was someone who understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the deliberate decision to act when the stakes are highest and the outcome is almost certainly fatal. Decades later, researchers discovered something else in the archives. The Gestapo officer who interrogated Violette after her capture had filed a formal report that included this assessment. Subject initially appeared to be a low-priority target. Small physical stature, female, civilian dress, carrying false papers of minimal sophistication. Subject is a trained British intelligence operative who conducted a sustained firefight against superior forces, demonstrated advanced tactical awareness, and showed resistance to interrogation beyond anything in my experience. She has provided zero intelligence despite 12 days of intensive questioning. This case represents a fundamental failure in threat assessment protocols. Recommend immediate review of assumptions regarding female operatives. Even in her silence, even in defeat, Violette Szabo had forced them to rewrite the rules. Her daughter, Tanya, spent her entire childhood asking questions no one could fully answer. Whether she had been afraid, whether she had thought about her daughter in those final moments against the wall at Ravensbrück. In 1958, a film was made about Violette's life, Carve Her Name with Pride. It sanitized the violence, romanticized the suffering, and turned a complex human being into a simplified heroine. Tanya attended the premiere. She watched an actress portray her mother's courage and sacrifice. Afterward, she told a journalist something that never made it into any newspaper. Everyone wants my mother to be a saint, but saints don't leave their children. Saints don't fight until they run out of bullets. My mother wasn't a saint. She was angry and human, and she made a choice because staying silent would have killed her from the inside. Intelligence Violette gathered during her first mission provided Allied commanders with detailed assessments of resistance network strength across Normandy. Intelligence that proved critical during the initial days of the invasion. The sabotage operations she coordinated during her second mission delayed German reinforcements, buying the Allies precious time to consolidate their beachhead. Her refusal to cooperate with the Gestapo protected 47 agents and resistance fighters whose names she carried in her memory, people who would have been arrested and executed if she had spoken. The exact number of lives she saved will never be known with certainty. What is certain is that her actions mattered in ways that were never fully acknowledged during her lifetime and remained obscured for decades after her death. The photograph of Tanya was never recovered. It likely burned with Violette's uniform or was discarded by guards who processed her body after the execution. But the image persists. A young mother hiding a picture of her 2-year-old daughter in the lining of her jacket. That photograph, never found but forever present in the historical record, became a symbol of what resistance actually costs, not grand speeches or public gestures, but quiet, relentless refusal in the face of systematic erasure. In 2000, a memorial was unveiled in Lambeth, London, honoring SOE agents who died during the war. Violette's name is engraved near the top of the list. Visitors leave flowers. School groups pause to read the plaques. But the memorial cannot capture the full weight of what she endured. It cannot explain the decision a 23-year-old widow with a toddler made when she chose duty over safety. It cannot answer the question that still haunts historians who study her case. What kind of person volunteers to walk into a death camp and still refuses to break.